we got a lot of questions. We always get a lot of questions. So let's talk a little bit about how this is going to work first. First of all, we have your amazing panelists with us today. I'll introduce them in just a moment. We're going to try to get to every single question that was answered. There was well over a dozen that were submitted. But basically what we're doing with these sessions, these are going to happen about every 6 weeks. So as you're submitting questions, if we don't get to them, don't worry about it. They are in our repository, so we will make sure to get to them in this session or the next one. But we think it's really important to answer these in a whole and complete manner. We want to give you the best answers that we can. So bear with us, and we will make sure to get to all of your questions. So let's get into it. First, we're going to introduce our panel. We've got 5 wonderful experts with us here today. So whenever I call your name, if you can just wave. First, we've got a couple familiar faces. We've got Jim Vajda, our Chief Wireless Officer, some certifications there. We've got Chris Couch, Senior Sales Engineer. Tuomas Aaltonen, is our Customer Service Representative. Laurent Samper, Technical Account Manager. And we've got Marko, who's our VP of Technical Support. All right, hope you guys are ready. This is going to be a really fun session. So question number 1, submitted by, the Cookie Monster. This is what I'm going to start restricting what you guys can submit as your names. But this one's for Chris. What factors do you take into consideration before picking a vendor?
So there's a lot to take into consideration. For me, some of the things that when I was working with customers direct, first thing is going to be budget. What can you afford and what can you do? Do you make the best of the entire situation, or do you work on one area at a time? So that the budget's going to be the biggest thing. Features are the next. What are you trying to do? So I would look at our vendors and figure out which one has the feature set that's going to be right for the design that you're trying to accomplish. And then some other things to really kind of think of is, what is the knowledge transfer going to be from whatever existing, vendor you're coming from or going to? What's that transition going to look like? Are you familiar with the new vendor that you're going with? Is it easier to stay with the vendor that you have based on the knowledge and the uplift of being able to support that on a day-to-day basis in a manner that's going to be meet the SLAs that you're trying to accomplish for your customers? Support, and then also the uplift costs. Are you forklifting everything out of your environment to go to a new vendor? Is that something that you can handle from your team? How many sites are you trying to do, and then what's the cost in that? Because when you also think of those things, you also have to think of your switching infrastructure. What are you supporting from that side of it? So it's not always just a Wi-Fi vendor that you have to worry about. It's what are the switching infrastructure? Do they have a complete portfolio that you're trying to support? Are you sticking with one vendor? Are you going multi-vendor? So there's a lot that goes into that, but those are kind of the key features that I think that I would look for first.
Great. Any other feedback from the panel? Are we good to keep on rolling?
I would just add, some of the smaller vendors in particular tend to be more specialized in certain use cases. They've built a solution that's really good at retail, or a solution that's really good at MDU, or it's really good at, 1 or 2 or 3 other things. So just, look at their marketing and see what areas they're really targeting, because that's what's going to get the investment from the vendor in terms of how well they're going to support the use cases you have.
Thanks, Jim.
Awesome. All right, moving to question number 2, submitted by Joe. This one is for Jim. Let's keep you talking. Okay,
Yeah.
So we've got some context down here that you can all read at your leisure, but it's about migrating a WPA2 enterprise network from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, authentication to EAP-TLS authentication. And what are some things to consider or watch out for there?
Really good question. So I just shared a link in the chat. I'm guessing that Joe's getting motivated by Microsoft's Windows changes to their EAP supplicant. So in Windows 11 and a newer version, they're deprecating support for PEEP with MS Chat v2. And as best as I can tell, that's not because over the air there's a problem with the protocol, a security issue. It's more with how Windows itself stores those credentials within Windows. But this is a big problem for enterprise networks, and people are scrambling. And what Microsoft wants you to do is go to a certificate-based authentication method like EAP-TLS. So to get into those questions, what to consider, watch out for, definitely want to test everything in a lab setting before you roll it out. In fact, you might consider doing kind of a staged rollout. So, you know, of course, do everything in the lab first, but then when it comes to production, roll out the certificates with Active Directory certificate services first, then go and look at the PCs. Is everything there? The cert's right? Does everything look okay? And then set up the new WLAN profile. Maybe leave the old one there as well as a fallback in case something doesn't work. Are folks using machine or user certs in Windows environments? I think a lot of people are trying to do both, particularly now that if they're migrating away from PEEP and they're using certs at the same time. And, you know, you've got a lot of great tools there, particularly with Cisco ICE and those MDM solutions. So one thing you could do is look at actually using EAP-TEAP, TEAP, which ICE supports. And Cisco has a really nice design guide, which I'll put in the chat, that explains how that works. It's kind of a more elegant way of doing EAP chaining. So you can do machine and user authentication in the same authentication session. Whereas the way to do that with EAP-TLS is actually just to do EAP-TLS twice, which can be kind of clunky sometimes. Mac OS doesn't support that. Mac OS doesn't have a concept of machine authentication versus user authentication. So probably just want to use EAP-TLS as well. So you can use both of those EAP methods at the same time, EAP-TEAP and EAP-TLS. I think you're in a really good spot. If it's only Windows and Mac OS, you know, you can probably leave PEEP behind completely. And those are operating systems that can handle seeing multiple AKMs and multiple EAP methods and work out what they're going to do pretty well. If you don't have low-end IoT kind of old legacy clients as well, I think you'll be okay. Oh, and a good reference from that is J.J. Manila's Wireless Security Architecture book. So order that on Amazon if you don't already have it.
Awesome. Any
Back
other?
to you.
Yeah, actually, I'll just jump in. Gene asked something in the chat. We just had a fantastic TLS webinar last week. So go check that out. That'll answer some of your questions you're looking for.
And you can find that on our YouTube channel on the playlist, Best Practices Webinar Series. So do your homework. All right, awesome. Moving on to question number 3 submitted by IAM. How can I measure the ERP and antenna gain for an AP radio? Do I need special equipment? And asking for any particular recommendations on what type of equipment. This one's for Laurent.
Yeah, thank you. So that's an interesting question. I would say to measure the effective radiated power, so the ERP and the antenna gain, you need specific and specialized equipment like kind of lab equipment that help you to measure what you are looking for. So if you think about measuring the power, you need a power meter to get the output power of the AP radio, or the antenna gain, a network analyzer, spectrum analyzer, definitively may help you to measure the gain of the AP antenna. Make sure you have good cable and connector with high quality over there. But then, yeah, so I would mainly say, I don't know the goal here, but I would say spectrum analyzer, or like we can see a lot on the lab, oscilloscope, where you can measure also the frequency, the waveform of the radio signal. So that's really a specific type of equipment that you will need to get this type of details, or measure that with those equipment. And then the formula, there is a formula that exists to get the ARP specific formula to calculate that, which is based on the transmitter power in watts multiplied by the antenna gain. So there are a lot of stuff to do, which might be very technical, but yeah, so specific equipment is needed, which usually being used on labs, I would say. So back to you, Eda. I don't know.
Great. Any other input from the panel? Cool. Awesome. All right. Moving on to question number 4, submitted by our friend Adriano. This one is for Marko. This one is asking, what is the theory from a client performance standpoint to the macro and micro radio power setting from a design standpoint? A couple other follow-up questions regarding why we'd want to have a small cell within a larger cell, the benefits of doing that, drawbacks or pitfalls, and what real world results are out there with that approach, and if it's worth checking out. So Marko, the floor is yours on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the main idea of the microcells is to get more capacity to the certain areas. So basically that's the main thing. And microcells, they also can reuse channels more to the lower power levels, which improves the radio quality, reduces interference and utilization. So better you have a radio quality than the high SNR, then you can use the higher modulations over there. And then you try to keep the cell sizes are small on the microcell, and so all the connected clients use those high data rates. Yeah, they should be close by to the AP. The micro radios, they are typically transmitting about like let's say 2 dBm over there. So that's coming back to that interference and utilization reduction over there. And also you need to have a separation between the channels, micro and micro channels over there, like 100 megahertz. So they don't interfere with each other's. Then you can try to optimize the roaming by using the steering thresholds. So basically when the signal level RSI is better than the threshold, then the client should move to the microcell and vice versa. And also like 802.11v supported clients should only get the information about the roaming micro PSSIDs for the roaming purpose. So basically they should go to the microcell. Our experience, what we have seen, those microcells have not worked as planned. Basically, we have seen too often issues, client connecting to the microcell, not to the micro, even if they're in the same room, especially like in the hospitals and office environments. So that's what I can say. Too many issues basically when we are checking the client load for radio and where the clients are connecting to.
Awesome. Anything to add, panel?
Yeah, I've seen the same thing as Marko.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty hard to get clients associated on the microcell, and it doesn't seem to provide a lot of benefit. So
I think it's fairly often it's disabled. I don't know anymore, you know, is it still kind of used actively? I haven't seen, at least if I look at our customer base recently, that we would have seen these deployments, but I don't know what are your thoughts?
yeah,
Probably due to these issues, that Marko just pointed out. And
yeah, typically the customers are disabling it. Yes, that's what we have seen.
Yeah.
All right. So moving right ahead, and just as an FYI, remember that Midwestern weather we were just talking about at the beginning of this session? Well, it has stolen poor Chris away from us. He just lost power. So hopefully we get him back, but if we don't, we'll go ahead and.
I'm here, I think.
Oh, you
I'm
are?
back. I'm back, yes.
Oh,
Slight hiccup.
glorious. Okay, it's not quite your turn yet, but I just wanted to warn people there's weather happening. So, Stay alert. Okay. And if there's a tornado, guys, you have permission to run. I know the webinar is important, but so are your lives. So stay alert. Look out your windows. Okay.
I've got the live radar feed right
Perfect.
here. So
amazing. Cool. Well, keep us posted. If we see you run, we'll know why. That'd be pretty fun content. But okay, question number 5. This one is for Tuomas, submitted by IAM. So if our regulatory domain limits ERP to 20 dBm and our home user customers seek for better coverage, should we look for APs with less power and higher antenna gain? What do you think?
Yeah, so if the regulatory domain transmit over maximum is set to 20 dBm, and if you have, say, external antenna with 5 dB gain, then your transmit power on the AP can be only 15 dBs, 50 dBm. So that antenna gain is added on top of the transmit power, so that you don't exceed that limit that's in the regulatory domain. So, but thinking of home users, I don't know if this is like a specific use case to extend the coverage to a certain, area within a building, for instance. Generally speaking, all access points, like home grade access points, they come with omnidirectional antenna. And I don't know if there are any access points where the maximum transmit power would be less than 20 dBm. But if you would use, say, omnidirectional antenna, like high gain omnidirectional antenna, I think there are some in the market which would still radiate equally in the horizontal direction, 365 degrees in a horizontal direction, but it would have some gain in the sideways, like in a vertical direction there would be gain, about 5 dBs. That could work to extend the coverage in a vertical direction, for instance.
I would say that would help in a 2-story thing, but I would think almost in a mesh scenario is kind of where you would want to go in that. Yeah,
exactly. But if we think about increasing that coverage of one access point, then using the directional antenna would be one option, or high gain omnidirectional antenna.
Yeah, but you don't want to exceed the regulatory domain limits, because then you're just
of course, you would need to stay within the limits, of course. Yeah,
you don't want.
I know at least on the enterprise grade APs, if you configure the it to use external antennas and you set the gain, it will automatically adjust the transmit power of the radio so that it doesn't exceed that maximum limit.
Yeah, you also don't want to go really high with your AP transmit power, because clients won't be able to match it, and it's okay to have some difference in transmit power between APs and clients, but you don't want a huge margin between them. Then you get a imbalanced link.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. Awesome. All right, moving ahead to question number 6, submitted by our friend Nick. This one is for Chris. Glad you're back with us, Chris. All right. So referring to our dear friend Eric's 7 minutes with 7SIGNAL session. So he mentions that many Wi-Fi problems can be resolved by making sure that the client driver software is updated to the appropriate version. So we're assuming that software bugs are not limited to client drivers. Can the data collected by the 7SIGNAL platform be analyzed to identify abnormal behavior that could be caused by bugs?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the benefit of both of the platforms that we have, with the Sapphire Eye and both the Mobileye. You can really see how the clients are behaving. So if it's not an issue with the driver, maybe it's an issue with the software on the controller that's controlling the access points. So there's something else that's going on. You're going to see that in both Mobileye and Sapphire Eye. From Sapphire Eye, when we look at it, we're going to see, potential beacon issues. Maybe beacons aren't happening, or they're not happening at the correct intervals. We can see RM issues or ARM issues, or whatever your radio resource management name is for whatever your solution is. We're able to pick up that. Maybe channels are going, only on channel 36. We've seen that in the past. Maybe they're changing too much, or they're not following the guides in there, that we can take a look at that. You can also see association and disassociation codes. So maybe they're getting the wrong information, and you can check that out as well and be able to visualize that in our solution. From the Mobileye side, you're going to see data rates. Maybe the client's not transmitting at the right data rates that are to be expected. Maybe there's something that's misconfigured, or if there is a bug in that software, either on the client or on the controller side, you're going to see that, because you're going to know what your design are, what your SLAs are, and what you're expecting to see. And if they all match up, it's an easy thing to take a look at. As well as connection type. Maybe you're not getting AX or Wi-Fi 6 connection, and you're getting something else like N or A. I've seen that as well, where you're expecting this and it's just not there. It's not actually being broadcasted. So that's a super easy thing to really just look at it and say, hey, I'm not getting the connection I'm expecting. It's really nice to visualize that very quickly. And then also in the Sapphire Eye, which is really neat, is there's a little info tab that we have that goes through and shows you all the capabilities of the access points. And maybe something's not getting beaconed, because we're looking at all those and we're seeing all the capabilities that are being broadcasted by those access points. So if that stuff that is not in the air and you're expecting it to be there, and you have it configured correctly, then you can really determine that something's happening on the controller side. And we're also going to see that when we connect with the Sapphire Eye back to those SSIDs, we're going to see that those features are not enabled, and be able to tell that there's something going on. So it's really, we definitely can see it. And there's many different ways that you can find it in just looking for what, if you want to get nitty gritty on some deep things, you'll see it at a high level, and then you just simply drill down to whatever the issue may be. But yeah, we certainly can find it. Anybody else have any specifics that you've seen in the field that we've been able to catch on? I know I touched on a couple of them.
That's a good answer. I'm sure Tuomas will maybe remind, we had a use case where one of our customers had an issue by upgrading the AP firmware, and everything seems to be working fine. And then we started to see via the 7SIGNAL platform that the throughput was going down dramatically, impacting all the users, but everything seems to be fine on the access point of view. And it was interesting to see that, keeping an eye on that and making sure you are optimizing your wireless infrastructure when you do AP firmware upgrade or something like that, that you understand what's happening at the edge of the network from the end user point of view. So definitely a good use case about that.
There are always, some bugs in even if you upgrade the code, the access point code version to a newer one, it may have some bugs that have not been yet identified by customers or users. We just recently, actually, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago internally, but if you look at the OFDMA utilization in some access point code versions, it may actually, on Wi-Fi 6, it may use OFDMA, but in some certain versions, if you go from a lower version to a higher version, it may have an issues with OFDMA in some cases. That is just one example, but there could be other things that may get worse as well.
Very cool. Thank you.
Sweet. Anything else from any other panelists to add before we move ahead? Sweet. All right. Question number 7, submitted by Andrew. This one is for Jim. I don't know if Jim's sick of talking about Wi-Fi 6 yet, but what are your thoughts on when to make the switch? Should we be designing for now or the next refresh cycle in 3 years?
Well, I'm really excited about Wi-Fi 6E and 6 gigahertz, but in the business world, you need a business justification for spending money on new shiny things, and I don't think there's really a strong use case a reason to disrupt your normal refresh cycle just to deploy it now? Maybe it is if you're, you have a very high density network with a lot of smartphones, right? That's where you're going to see 6 gigahertz support in the next couple of years very quickly. But so I would say, as much as I hate to say it, you should probably just wait till your next refresh cycle to deploy it. But definitely redesign or review your design to see if it's going to work well when you do that. Any thoughts from anyone else?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It's you're going to have to redesign no matter what. But yeah, I think it's really going to be just, it's going to be the end user device. What are you supporting is really going to drive that conversation always. And you're right. If it's smartphones that you're worried about, then absolutely, depending on the newer laptops, if you're buying them all with 6E, then obviously you need to do that. But it also depends on your refresh cycle. When is the money available to do it? And then in your design, what are you trying to accomplish? So I think it's kind of it's to quote Anders, it depends on a few others. So it definitely depends on where you're at.
Yeah, one thing you should be doing now is thinking about WPA3, right?
Absolutely.
That's required for 6 gigahertz support. And you don't have to wait till you deploy Wi-Fi 6E or Wi-Fi 7 in the future to enable WPA3 and get through all the growing pains that's going to cause. So you can, bite off that small bit of the change before you deploy Wi-Fi 6E and get that out of the way too beforehand. Yeah,
I mean, anytime you can improve security, why not do it ahead of time? You're going to be prepared for that next refresh cycle when you go to 6E and have to support it. So that's awesome.
All right. Any other feedback from the panel? We're good to move on to question number 8. All right, let's do it. All right, question number 8 submitted by Andrew. Andrew is a big fan of us, guys. This one is for Laurent. All right, we're talking high density. So when designing for high density environments, do you have any experience and advice when using RX-SOP as a means to improve client experience and channel reusability? Asking about benefits or any gotchas besides the fact that your clients must be within the signal sensitivity of the AP.
That's a very good question. Thanks a lot, Andrew. So we have tried this with some of the customer. I was talking about that with Tuomas, and we need to be very careful when you set the receive start of packet threshold too high. So this can be more problematic than providing you benefits. So it really needs validation and testing if you want to enable that. So by increasing this threshold to decode for decoding the frame, the receive start of packet will tell to the access point to consider all the lower signal or RSSI signal as a noise. So treat them as a signal noise, meaning that you need to be aware that the access point will then ignore the frame with lower RSSI signal that do not meet the receive start of packet threshold. And the device or the client will not know that. So it's important to know that this associated client device outside of the receive start of packet threshold will have no clue or no knowledge of these settings on the access point. And he will say, oh, the access point is not responding. So need to be very careful about that. What we have seen as well with that receive start of packet enabled, it might increase the CCA threshold, which is by default minus 90 dBm for the signal detection. And if you do enable the receive start of packets, it can be minus 82, minus 80. It really depends, which can be creating more collisions in the air. So take into consideration that you will have to keep an eye on all the retry rate packets because more collisions happening in the air. This is something we have seen and experienced with customer and using our Sapphire sensor, then you can see that happening in the air, which can be very useful if you enable such type of settings. So in the overall, yeah, the receive start of packet can be an effective tools if you're looking to improve the performance and the reusability of the Wi-Fi channel in high density environments. However, yeah, it's really important that you have to be careful and you have to consider the impact you may have on the client performance. So just make sure that you test that before deploying in productions. This really needs validation and testing before having that in productions. So I don't know, some feedback on that or?
Yeah,
No, I
that's
think- Go ahead. Jim.
really well put, Laurent. I think, we usually kind of see customers getting the most out of it in large public venues, stadiums and arenas. That's where it's really going to have some benefit because there's so much CCI and channel utilization is so high, and there's no other ways to get around it. So that's where the benefit mostly is. And it seems, I think one of the reasons people try to use it is to try to improve client roaming. I don't think that's a great idea because once a client goes below that threshold, it just falls off a cliff and you end up with a really bad end user experience. So, rule of thumb for RX-SOP is use it to reduce the impact of CCI a little bit. It's not a magic bullet, but try not to use it to change client behavior.
I wonder actually if there's any kind of limit in a standard how low you can set the CCA threshold, because you may start breaking things, right? If you set it like really low and your access point is just talking all the time on top of other stations.
I think you can get up pretty high with RX-SOP, maybe into the meg 60s, I want to say.
I think so.
And that's,
that
you're right, it could
crazy.
really be counterproductive at that point.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a blanket feature that you just turn on in a regular environment. It's meant for a specific design using very directional antennas covering very specific areas, not something that you just send out and expect it to work everywhere.
Yeah.
So here it was asked for high density environment. No. So, but yeah, so it's better for high density environments in that case, using that features.
Yep.
Oh yeah, high density, yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Any other feedback from the panel? All right. And sorry if you could, there's quite literally someone chopping down a tree right here. So hopefully you can't hear that, but if you can, I do apologize. What a day for the environment. Jeez. Oh, it's live TV. What can we say? Question number 9, submitted by our friend Andrew. This one's for Marko. When designing Wi-Fi, a lot of the answers are, it depends, our favorite 2 words, but as a rule of thumb, for a static number of seats, such as a lecture theater, classroom, auditorium, how many clients per AP or per radio would you realistically be looking at? Are you most confident in your estimates when using APs per square foot, bandwidth per client, or clients per AP or radio, and why?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, depends. So basically, I mean, there's a lot of factors over here. So what is the protocol and the client device types and applications they are using, bandwidth requirements, and so on. But I would say that maybe on the high density environment, classroom, auditoriums, you're using maybe 20 megahertz channels. I would think about like a 25, 35 clients per radio, that ballpark. And also, I think the best way to estimate is use the bandwidth per client approach. So calculating capacity per user, and then you can get the clients per radio over there. So use it keep the cell sizes small, disable low data rates. Since I think one of the biggest issue what we have seen on the high density environments is the management traffic utilization. So basically beacons and probes, which will send to the lowest data rates. So that's why it's important to disable the low rates as much as possible. And then basically focus the AP energy towards the clients. So use proper antennas. And then also keep in mind that the clients typically support 2 streams when you do the capacity calculation, even if the APs are supporting 4 streams. So it's important to keep in mind, but I think that's my thoughts. Anything else, anybody?
Yeah, I would, sometimes you just want to, make the cell as small as possible within the environment, and then that determines really how many seats or seats per AP radio you're going to have. And indoors it's hard to make cells really, really small. So but yeah, keep the transmit power really low and use directional antennas as much as possible.
It also matters, like the question says, it depends, but it also matters, are those clients, are they just associating to the access point radio, or are they, actively using it? Are they transmitting data all the time, like in a lecture theater or auditorium where students may be doing an exam at the same time, so they would be transmitting data frames, and whereas in a, say, in an arena, you may just have most clients idle associated to the radio. It's something to take into consideration.
Very good. Anything else or any other panelists? All right. We're in the double digits now, everyone. Question number 10. And then also, just as an FYI, I do see your questions coming in the Q&A panel. We're adding them to our list. We are prioritizing those previously submitted, but I see all these awesome questions. Just know that we will get to them. It may be today, it may not be today, but they are going to be on our list for future sessions. All right, question number 10. This is from Forrest. This is for Tuomas. For each new SSID, a virtual MAC address is created, all from the same radio. Does each SSID have dedicated probes? For example, 16 SSID on 2.4 gigahertz and 16 on 5 gigahertz.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, so if there's a client device that sends a probe request, that means all the BSSIDs on the same channel need to respond with the probe response. So in this case, well, in this case, if you have 16 SSIDs enabled on the access point, all those BSSIDs would need to send a probe response. Sometimes the client device may send a directed probe request, and in that case, it specifies the SSID name in the beacon. Sorry, not in the beacon, but in the probe request. And in that case, the access point would, or the one BSSID from that access point would just respond. So it depends on the probe request type if the SSID name is defined in the request or not. But having 16 SSIDs would be pretty insane and would have a pretty serious impacts onto how the Wi-Fi would perform. So
yeah, unfortunately, we've seen environments that have been close.
yeah, and the problem, of course, Marko, you already mentioned that in the previous answer, but the probe responses are always sent with the lowest enabled data rate. So that would just cause pretty significant overhead onto your onto the channel utilization.
Yeah, especially with that management traffic, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
You see clients when they send the probe requests, they don't even look at the enabled rates because they'd have to wait for a beacon. So they probe at the lowest rate the band supports, regardless of what you've got enabled. So yeah, it can get ugly. It's not just beacon overhead that SSIDs create. It's definitely a problem with probing too.
Yeah. And if there's CCI, if you have multiple APs on same channel or neighbors are on the same channel, that will just increase it even more. So for one request, you may get tens of different responses.
Great. Any other feedback from the panel before we move to question 11? Jim's eyes are wandering.
We do have.
He has more thoughts.
I was just remembering one scenario I saw where I think if an AP was sending 2 probe responses for every probe request. So that would make it 16 probe responses if times 2 to 32 probe responses, and if it received a broadcast probe request. So
that could be one of the bugs actually in the AP code that we just discussed earlier.
Absolutely.
You never know what happens unless you check on the frame level. Yeah.
Well, one of the fixes for that, isn't it the multi-BSS ID element that can handle that?
In 6 gigahertz, yeah. So the multi-BSS ID beacon that allows you to advertise multiple SSIDs within a single beacon frame, and just specify the differences in that IE. So that helps out a lot in 6 gigahertz. I don't know if you can use that in the legacy bands, and I'd expect a lot of clients just won't work with it if you could. So
yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit
more. It requires client support for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have like a Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 5 client on 5 gig band, and do for instance Intel, if you update to latest Intel versions, does it actually support it or not? Not sure.
The multiple BSSID element I think is only in AX, so you have to be running.
Oh, it's
AX
already in AX, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it may be just for 6 gigahertz. I have to do a little more research on that, but I remember hearing about it.
All right. Any other final thoughts on this question? All right, moving right ahead. All right, question 11 for Chris from Andrew. So some context here. All our buildings, new buildings, are what we may call wireless unfriendly. They're designed with no ceiling, exposed pipework. Rent is $2,000. Just kidding. It's not New York City. Large atriums and lots of glass. Third-party wireless designs and installations have been carried out, and the results are not ideal. We can see wireless signals from 4 floors above due to the atrium. CCI is huge. Couple questions here for us. So, is the only answer to turn the power down and reposition the APs, or are there other solutions? Particularly interested on how a design might handle atriums in general when client numbers are in the low thousands, and the connectivity is wireless first. Lots to unpack there.
Yeah, that's a large question. So the first I would kind of ask with this is, you mentioned third-party designs. So in the statement of work, was it specific to use, directional or patch antennas, or was it just blanketed as omnis? What was the design requirements for that? And then also, were those design requirements meant by whoever did the third-party wireless design. So I would go back to them and say, hey, here's our requirements. Here's the building type. We gave you a design that doesn't, that you provided didn't work. So, I would probably go back and ask them to fix it if you could, to make sure that they follow what you provided. And if not, that's a good way to really go back and look at your statements of work and your design requirements to be very specific, so that things like this don't happen, because they can be a little bit vague in there. But a couple different things, outside of that, and having somebody else, that did it come back and fix it. But channel plans, if you're seeing CCI, look at the channel plan for the specific APs that may be around that area. Because if you're seeing the same channels 4 floors above and below, I mean, depending on what you're doing, hopefully it's 20 megahertz channels on 5 gigahertz. Could be a thing. Power, AP placement. If you're moving APs around to get them out of that atrium area, you're going to have specific APs covering that atrium, and they should probably only be on whatever floor the atrium is at to be able to support those users. So if you can move them back, but the problem is that if you start moving access points, you're going to affect the rest of your design. So it's basically an entire redesign. But in those areas, directional antennas, sectors or whatever you can to adjust signal away from that area is probably going to be the best kind of way to do that. But it sounds like it's just got to be redesigned. You can't go back and change parts of a design without affecting the rest of it, because it's going to affect, power and channel and placement, coverage in specific areas. You might have to move APs that are, supposedly covering certain spots, or, there's elevators and everything else that get in the way. So there's a lot that has to happen if you're just trying to fix one spot. You don't really have to redesign the whole thing. But I would start with power. I'd start with channel and antennas. If you're stuck with internal antennas, you really don't have a real way to fix it besides just moving stuff away and turning down power. So start with your third party, figure out what they're doing. Try to change your antenna type or AP types, antenna types, and power. And if you have to, make a separate channel plan just for those APs so they don't step on top of each other. But make sure that everything plays well in the design you have. Jim, I know we talked about this a little bit before. I don't know if I missed anything on that.
No, I think it's like you said, if you look up there and see omnidirectional antennas in this environment, it's just afraid it's a little hopeless. So
yeah,
time to go back to the VAR and let them know the solution isn't delivering on your requirements. So if they're using directional antennas, maybe there is a way to do some smaller remediation that's not going to be a big lift. But yeah, sounds more like a layer 8 problem, right?
Absolutely.
Great. Any other thoughts on this question from the rest of the panel? All right, I think we have time for one more, because I want to give enough time for question number 12 here from Pedro. This is for Jim, asking about differences between two different types of architectures here, distributed and centralized.
Yeah.
Jim, floor's yours.
Yeah, so this is a good way to think about this is with understanding the different planes, the concept of planes in a WLAN. So the data plane, the control plane, and the management plane. And these different architectures do different things with those. So centralized architecture normally means a controller on site, and all 3 planes, the data planes, the control plane, and the management plane are centralized. The controller handles 95% of that. Now, in some cases, you can use other, there are hybrid architectures, but we'll give the simple answer right now. And the AP, therefore, you use like what's called a lightweight AP. There's not a lot of compute resources on the AP, because it's just it's taking frames and forwarding them up to the controllers where all the interesting things happen. With a distributed architecture, that's how most of the cloud-based AP systems work. So there's no on-site controller, which means the data plane and the control plane are distributed. They're handled by the APs directly. So those APs need a little bit more CPU and memory to be able to do that. And then the management plane is up in the cloud. That's where all the config changes and software updates and things like that are handled. But you know, in both cases, there are options to kind of blur the lines and do different things with the data plane in particular. But in general, that's the difference between them.
Great. Anything else to add from any other panelists?
No, the only thing I'd say is they all serve their separate purposes. You know, you have to pick what's right for you, whether you need to do cloud management or you can do on-prem centralized. You know, there's trains of thought on each of them and which way you really want to go with it. But really, you have to figure out what's going to be best for your support, how you can support it. And then from a hands-off perspective, do you want to be able to, you know, manage it from the cloud or be on-prem?
Okay, great. Well, we have to cut these a little bit short because we want to make sure we are focusing on the quality of our answers here. So thank you, panel. Wow, what an awesome job. What an awesome session. I love these things. So we're going to take any questions that were submitted that weren't answered, keep them in our repository. Anything that came through the Q&A today, we'll also add to our next session, which is going to be in another 6 weeks. So keep your peepers peeled for that session. It'll come up on your calendar shortly. But awesome. Thanks again, Laurent, Marko, Tuomas, Jim, Chris. Thanks to all of you for being here. Tuomas is actually going to be back next week. So keep your eyes peeled for Friday's invite for the next session. So we will see you there, same time, same place. Have a great weekend and hang in there, weathering the storms out there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.